Michael, why would you put somebody with that kind of baggage and that kind of outlook on America, what defines America to him, inside the West Wing of the White House?
I think in large measure because Donald Trump doesn't look at it through that lens. He doesn't see Bannon that way. He sees him as someone that he has confidence in, that helped him secure success at the ballot box last Tuesday, and will be a part of his administration. I just took note of the fact that he referred to Bannon and Trump as, and Reince Priebus as equals, and there is no equal to the chief of staff in the West Wing, but now there is. So that should be something that people also need to pay a lot of attention to. I know a lot of folks in the party are, because they don't know what that means. But as far as Donald Trump is concerned, Bannon is his main guy. It's his muse. It's someone who is in his head and that he listens to, that advises him. He's his consigliere. And unless there's something, I think, that's very overt, maybe what our friend Mr. Corn has written gets publicized and more of this narrative is out there, then we'll see how Donald Trump deals with it.
Susan, let's get back to the reality of the Oval Office and how it works. President of the United States gets up in the morning. Somebody decides, well, he decides what newspapers he wants to read, what morning shows he wants to watch. Knowing Trump, he'll watch Morning Joe probably and fiddle around with Fox and Friends or whatever. And then he'll be deciding how he's doing that day. And he may look at a newspaper, but then start around 8 o'clock in the morning, the President of the United States is given his daily presidential briefing. He also meets with his chief of staff, who's already met with the under chiefs of staff, the deputies. And so that's his day, pretty much run by. And now we're finding out that in addition to Reince Priebus, there's this other soul that's going to be in the room all the time as a co-equal, this consigliere, this character who has these views. Why would Trump want these views brought to him with the headlines each morning, giving him a guidance on what to do that day, who to meet with, how to be president,
first of all,
whether Obama ran?
They won't be equal, because if Reince Priebus is in fact the chief of staff and operating the chief of staff, he is the most important staffer that the president has. And it is not unusual for a president to set up some competing power centers, as Ronald Reagan did, but there's nothing like being the chief of staff, which has so much say over what the president reads, who the president sees, who is the last person the president talks to before he makes a decision. So that's one reason I think that a lot of establishment Republicans in town were greatly reassured that Reince Priebus was chief of staff, even if they were appalled, and I think many of them were appalled, that Steve Bannon was named into this central position. But remember, there's no confirmation process for the staffers that the president puts around him at the White House. Those are the people he chooses to have around him and to listen to.
Well, how about the minorities that worry about? I mean, let me go to you, Michael, because you're a minority. And the fact is, I'm just thinking, I hear a lot of people are scared. Is this going to make them less scared that Breitbart's guy, that Steve Bannon is in the White House with the president having his ear?
Well, apparently not. I mean, I think that's what's driving a lot of the angst that you hear and see out there among a lot of folks, because they don't know what this means. They take what they have learned from the Breitbart website and from stuff that they may associate with Steve Bannon, and that sort of fuels this. But I want to go back to something Susan said. I don't know if that scenario plays out exactly the way you think it, the way you said it, Susan, that, Reince is going to have that kind of access and control, yes, but I'm not sure if he'll be the last or the first person to get in the president's ear with Bannon there. That's not how this worked in the campaign. And Bannon was someone that, as I understood it, that Donald Trump really, really looked to help him sort of navigate some of these heavier waters. It was Reince who did the boots on the ground, the practical political stuff. But in terms of what the message was and how Donald Trump was going to lay out his campaign every day, that was Steve and the family and Trump.